The Department of Justice and Constitutional Development has announced the addition of sexual intimidation as a punishable offence under the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act. The Act will also include incest as a sexual violation where one of the parties is a child. Other vulnerable persons of the sexual intimidation include persons with disabilities, female students and workers at academic or training institutions under the age of 25. Persons receiving community-based services, including the elderly, will also be included under this amendment. Now, offenders will be registered on the sexual offenders list if sentenced to more than 18 months in prison. Let's get you more details on these new additions from the Registrar of the National Sexual Offenders Register. Ntombi Matjila joins us here in studio this morning. Ntombi, thanks very much indeed for coming on.
Thanks for inviting us, Michelle.
So give us just a sense of these additions to the Sexual Offences Act. When did they come into play?
It came into play on the 31st of July, 2022. However, the President signed the bill into law in January 2022.
They're important additions, aren't they?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. Tell us why.
It's very much important. If you could have recalled when we started initiating or implementing the National Register for Sex Offenders, at the time, the protection was only afforded to children and persons with mental disabilities. And we did not include every sex offender to a point where if a sex offender who has violated an adult person will, in any event, work with children. But now we have listened to all the people who have said, but if a person has violated a child and is not included by virtue of that, the sexual offences did not cover that. What do you mean? And then we have listened to the public, and as part of strengthening the National Register for Sex Offenders, we are now including all convicted sex offenders, irrespective of which victim have they violated. Although, in terms of the Act, we have extended the ambit of the National Register for Sex Offenders to include other vulnerable persons. Those are those that you have mentioned, which are young ladies under the age of 25,
right.
Older persons. We have recognized other forms of disabilities, whether it can be sensory, it can be physical, it can also be virtual.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's why the term is sexual intimidation,
yes.
because of these various forms,
yes.
right?
Yes.
When we talk sexual intimidation, what do we mean? Is it sort of equal to harassment?
Yeah. For instance, if I can say something to you now, and then you perceive you've got reasonable belief that it is sexual intimidation, you can go and report that. And when convicted, I can be convicted similarly to the one who has committed a violent sexual offense.
Wow. And you go on the sexual offenders list.
Precisely. Because now we are taking into account every convicted sex offender. We are no longer selecting into saying that if you have violated this category of vulnerable persons, you go there. Now it's every sex offender.
And what are the, aside from going onto the list, what's the sanction for sexual intimidation?
It's, you are convicted similarly to the one who is convicted a violent sexual offense. And then the sanction will be, you will not be allowed to work with any vulnerable person. You will not be allowed to adopt. You will not be allowed to be where vulnerable persons are congregate or in that space.
Ntombi, in your opinion, I mean, should there be a separate... What's the word that I'm looking for? Should there be separation between sexual intimidation and someone who is guilty of a violent sexual attack?
It shouldn't be. Because sexual intimidation, harassment, is very much equal to a person who actually violates you.
And perhaps a precursor.
Exactly. Let's say, for example, when you look into fleshing, or when you look into exposing a vulnerable person to pornographic material, in its nature, when you look into it, it's something that is, very much meek, which is not violent, which is not even physical. But the repercussions of what you are doing, mentally to that person, it's quite dire. So which means when you are convicted, then you will be convicted similar to a person who has actually committed a violent physical sexual offense.
And is that kind of behavior, you raised flashing as one example, exposing a vulnerable person to pornographic material as another example, is that, in your experience, a precursor to a physical attack?
Yes, because, for example, sexual grooming. You take a child, you take the pornographic material. Day one, it's non-physical, you simply are just showing them the pictures. Day two, it will lead to, you have seen the pictures, now at least start by touching me. Day three, then, it escalates to something which is much violent. And with sexual grooming, it ends up being, or having a child being part of what you're trying to do to them, which will then be, if you tell your parents that I have done this to you, remember, you are the one who has initiated this. So it may start as subtle as we want it to be, but it is a build-up to something which is going to be much physical and much violent.
Yeah. The addition of sexual intimidation, is this in line with sort of global standards, and have we been lagging behind insofar as this is concerned?
Yes, because, for example, if you take into account sexual harassment is that, petting, touching, which is so uncomfortable, and if a person does not say anything, it escalates to something else. But some people will end up saying it exactly, this is what I'm going to do to you. And if you are used to playing around, you will think that, no, it was just a joke. But when it escalates to something, then many people say, but I have seen that, when it was starting, I did not take that into account, that it was serious. Until now, that this person has raped me. I thought it was a joke. I thought he was not serious or she was not serious.
It's another step in our fight against gender-based violence in the country, isn't it? And perhaps, given what you've just outlined to us, a step that is long overdue.
Yes, precisely.
What do you hope this will make in terms of, what difference this will make in terms of acting as a deterrent, harsher sentences? What's the hope from this?
The hope from this is that when we said we wanted to put a stop against the scourge of gender-based violence, this was one of those actions that we are hoping that we will catch as many sex offenders as we hope to remove them, off the streets, to remove them from doing what has been happening, to a point where there was, a public outcry that many women, many children are getting violated. However, when you look into it with another eye, especially when we say the more we convict the sex offenders, the more they are off the streets. But the more you have them in the register, it then tells you that there is a huge problem in the society that we have to deal with.
Absolutely. Ntombi Matjila, let me thank you for your time this morning. Such an important discussion. Ntombi is the Registrar of the National Sexual Offenders Register, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, announcing the addition of sexual intimidation as a punishable offence under the Sexual Offences Amendment Act. Ntombi, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.